If you want to save money in your garden, one of the first places to start is by saving your own seed. But seed saving can be intimidating, especially if you're just beginning. So today I'm going to share with you the easiest crops from which you can save seed, how to know whether a certain crop is a candidate for seed saving, how to do it, and then how to store them when you're done. Before I show you which crops I've been saving seed from for years and how to do it, it's important to know which crops from which you can save seed. Number one, you can save seed from crops that are labeled as open pollinated or heirloom. Either one of those, they are going to come true to type, which means the next season they will grow the same kind of plant that you had this season. So that's what you want to start out with. When you're looking at a hybrid plant, what you need to know is that that plant was created as an intentional cross between two different other kinds. And the genetics are going to be such where if you save the seed from that plant, the plant that grows from it, even if it does grow, sometimes they don't, it may or may not actually be the same. It may revert back to one of the parents, to both of the parents, but with different characteristics. Basically, you're just rolling the dice to see if you get the same kind of plant or one that will work at all. And some people do this just for fun, just to see what will happen. But if you're really interested in seed saving and being able to depend on your seed, definitely start out with open pollinated varieties. Now, this is really easy to find out. If you planted from a seed packet, then you can go back to that seed packet, figure out what variety you planted, and then you can just do a quick Google search and you can find out whether it's an open pollinated or a hybrid. Anytime you see open pollinated or heirloom, you're good to go. If you see hybrid, that would be one that I would avoid. But that's an easy way to be able to find out if your plant meets the first criteria for being able to save the seed. But just because a plant is open pollinated, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can automatically save that seed, because some crops require wind or insects to pollinate them. And if you have the same species of a plant but different varieties, such as a summer squash and a zucchini, and they're planted nearby, bees and other insects are going to take that pollen between the two flowers, and what you're essentially doing is you've got a hybrid that is a natural hybrid. And in that case, the seed of that plant that you save seed from may or may not come true, just like we talked about with hybrids. So even if you have a self-pollinated plant, if you have any other plants of a different variety but the same species, which you can look that up online if you want, then I would avoid saving the seed from that plant without taking extra precautions. But this is a beginner's video, so I'm not going to go into those precautions. If you want to make it easy, then choose plants that are overwhelmingly self-pollinating. Now, what self-pollinating means is that their flowers are going to pollinate themselves without the help of an insect or wind. Now, sometimes insects can get involved, but usually that's not an issue, so I typically don't worry too much about that. So what we want to know is which plants are usually self-pollinating. In general, your beans, your peas, your cowpeas, field peas, legumes, those are self-pollinating. Those are excellent candidates for seed saving, and they're really easy to seed save. And then you've got your tomatoes and even your peppers. Those are really easy to seed save because they are self-pollinating. So let's look at some of the easiest seeds to save, the ones that I've been saving in my garden and I continue to save in my garden year after year, and how to do it. So let's take a look at these seeds here that I've been saving for several years. And this one right here is the zipper cream pea. It's a type of cowpea. You may also know of similar type of peas that are like black-eyed peas and purple hulled peas. And that's what I have here. I have black-eyed peas. This is the California cowpea. I've been planting this year after year for almost 10 years, and I've been saving the seed each year from this. Now, the key to saving seeds, especially with any type of bean or peas, is going to be to let the pod dry out completely. What you're going to want is you're going to want this to be completely dry. That way, when you open the pod up, then you have all of these dried peas or dried beans or dried whatever you're doing, and they are hard. When you take your fingernail to them, you won't be able to dent them at all. They're going to be hard. Those are going to be the ones that you can save. Now, the good news is that this is also the type of bean or pea that you can eat. So some of these, if I have a lot, like I've got a whole bucket here, I may end up using it in the kitchen, but I can also save these for seeds in the future. That's what I've got here, is the seeds that I've saved in the past of the California cowpea, black-eyed pea. The same is going to be the case for any other bean. These are pinto beans that I've saved from past years, black beans that I've saved. This is another type of pinto bean, it's called a bingo bean. This year I did not get a great harvest of this just because we had a hard bean year, but I was able to get enough to be able to save seed. So I'm going to plant these next year and cross our fingers we have a better year with beans. This is a Blue Lake pole bean from 2020. I was able to get enough of those to save. And over here I have peas. Now, this is the same way with regular green peas. These are peas that I grew in my spring garden. These are sugar and dwarf peas. Same thing, we want to make sure that they are dry, and all we have to do is open them up and you have the peas inside. I actually saved these from my spring harvest and I replanted them for a fall harvest, and they've already come up. So really, this is super simple to be able to have your own crop without having to buy anymore. One thing you want to keep in mind when you are wanting to save your bean or your pea or your cowpea seeds is that anytime you let the pod completely mature on the plant is going to consider that a signal that it's able to produce its own seed. And so a lot of times you'll find the actual overall production to slow down. And so we really don't want to do that, right? Especially if we're wanting to harvest for green beans, like snap green beans, or if we're wanting to harvest for, like, I like black-eyed peas that I actually am able to shell out and cook fresh without them dried. So what I normally do when I'm saving these seeds is I will pick them continuously throughout the season, and then at some point, either when the production slows or maybe 6 weeks or so before a frost, I'll stop picking altogether, and then I will let them dry out on the vine themselves at the end of the season. I like to do that then because I want to be able to pick enough to signal to the plant to keep producing. That'll give me a bigger harvest. And then at the end of the year, then I'm able to leave them on the pod to save. Ideally, you'll be able to time that where the pods on your plants, pointing over here because I've got beans over here and I'm looking at them, but you want to be able to time them where they dry out before the frost. But if you find that you don't have time to do that, if you have a frost coming on and your pods are not completely dried out, then what you can do is go ahead and pull the pods, and then you can leave them to dry in the pod. Don't shell them out, but leave them to dry inside in the pod, and then wait until they're dry and then shell them out. Just make sure not to save them, to put them away until you can take your fingernail and press against the seed and there's no dent whatsoever. That will show you that it's a viable seed to be able to save. So overall, beans, peas, cowpeas, those are the easiest ones to save, but they're not the only easy ones to save. I've got another example here in okra, and okra is actually probably one of my favorites to save seeds from, maybe because it was one of the first crops I saved seeds from, and these I've been saving since my very first year. So the key to saving okra seeds is twofold. Number one, since it can be insect pollinated, they are self-pollinating as well, but insects, bees, they love okra pods. Since they can be insect pollinated, then I would recommend only saving them if you're only growing one kind. Remember, it needs to be open pollinated. This is a Clemson spineless, which, like I said, I've been growing for a long time. The next key is you need to wait until the pod completely dries out, because when you open the pod, then you want it to reveal black seeds, and they need to be hard. As I mentioned, they need to be black and they need to be hard. If you open the seeds of an okra pod that is still green or it hasn't dried out completely, you'll see white seeds. Those seeds are not viable. They're not going to be able to mature to plant. They won't, as far as I know, turn black later. So you leave the pods on the plant until they dry out completely. Now, all of us, if we've grown okra, we have missed okra pods because when the heat goes on in the summer, then you sometimes can't get to them in time. So some of the ones that are growing too big that I didn't get to, I just let them stay on the plant to be able to save seed from later. Again, like any other plant, I try not to do that early in the season because I want the plant to know that it still needs to produce. But toward the end of the season, I like to leave them to be able to dry. So okra is another one that's very easy to save seed from. I do want to mention two other crops that are really easy to save seed from, but keep in mind that they are both insect pollinated. So if you save the seed from them, you need to have, number one, an open pollinated variety, but number two, you don't need any others around. And if you hit those two marks, then you can easily save seed, and that is from watermelon and basil. So watermelon, we've all eaten it. If it has seeds in it, they have this tough black seed that we're always like scooping out or spitting out or whatever. Well, you can save that as long as the watermelon is an open pollinated variety and you haven't planted other varieties near that watermelon in the past or at the same time, where they were flowering at the same time. That's one reason I haven't been able to save watermelon seeds in several years, because I love watermelon so much. I'm always planting different varieties of them. But if you're just planting one, it's super easy to just be able to take the seed as you're eating it, dry it out, rinse it first, then dry it out on a coffee filter or newspaper or a screen or something like that. Let them dry completely, and then you can store them away for the following year. Basil is another one that is really easy, but again, it is insect pollinated. And so if you plant several varieties of basil nearby, you don't want to save the seed. I've actually had that happen before where I didn't save this on purpose. I think it was actually a volunteer, but this is beautiful green basil plant. And I pick it and it's spicy, like cinnamony spicy. And I realized that seed had come from a cross between the green basil and a cinnamon basil that I had grown in the past. So keep that in mind. But if you're only growing one kind of basil and it flowers, because basil flowers so fast and easy, you want to let those flowers dry out to brown. And then once you do that, you can take that brown flower and you can open it and you can see these black seeds ready to save. Again, as long as it's open pollinated, as long as you don't have other varieties planted nearby, basil is really easy to save for seed for the following year. Okay, so once you have your seeds selected and you have harvested them, how do you store them? The key is, number one, to make sure that they are completely dry. We talked about the dry pods, we talked about the fingernail thing. Anything that you store as far as seeds, they need to be completely dry. If you rinse your watermelon seeds completely, then you want to let them dry. And then from there, you have different options as far as how you store your seeds. As you can see, I like to use jars, but it's important to know that the seeds need to be in a dark place. So if you do use clear jars like this, then you need to make sure and store them out of light. I also have used Ziploc bags in the past, plastic bags, especially when I have a lot of seeds, like these Blue Lake seeds. But if you're using anything that has a seal like this, make triple sure that the seeds are dry. Otherwise, you're going to get mold, and that's not going to work for your seed saving. I've done this as well. This is actually loofah, which is another easy one to save seed from, similar to watermelon. You can also do smaller jars, like baby food jars is an idea if you have a smaller amount. You can also use an envelope or a pill bottle or anything like that. Really, there's lots of different options for how you store your seeds. Now, the key after you put them in a container is you want to put them in a cool, dark place. I just put them in the coolest room of my house. Usually that's my grow room, in a cabinet where it's dark and it's cool. And a lot of seed will actually stay viable for up to 5 years. It does depend on the seed. Some seed will stay viable for longer, some not as long, but many of these seeds will stay viable for up to 5 years. Now, ideally, you do not want the temperature to fluctuate. You don't want humidity. You don't want cold. You don't want hot. But I have to say, seeds are resilient. This bag of okra, I think I harvested a couple of years ago, and I just put it in this bag that's obviously breaking and tearing. But I accidentally left it in my greenhouse over the winter last year, yet I used those same seeds to plant my okra planting this year, and they did just fine. So all that to say, try to use your best practices by keeping it in a cool, dark environment where you don't have any direct sunlight or fluctuation in temperature, but seeds are resilient, so you never know what you're gonna get, even if you forget bag in the greenhouse. So you may be thinking, that's great, Jill, I'd love to save beans, but what about tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers and other crops like that? Well, I want to invite you to listen to episode number 268 of the Beginner's Garden podcast, where I go over how to seed save from 8 popular summer crops. I give more information on the nuances that you need to know before you save seed from your favorite crops like tomatoes and cucumbers and squash. And you can totally do it, but I'm going to talk more in depth on how to do that. Make sure to listen to episode 268 of the Beginner's Garden podcast. Also, if you're interested in cross-pollination and distances and isolation and just general how-tos on seed saving, you might want to check out episode number 147 of the Beginner's Garden podcast. That's where I interview Phil Kauth from Seed Savers Exchange. He gives us great information on saving seeds because that's what they do. I buy a lot of my seeds from them every year myself, and that is a great conversation. A lot of the information that I gave you today actually comes from their website, which has lots of great information as well. But overall, I hope that this answered some basic questions for you on how to get started saving your own seed. If you'd like more garden content like this in regard to growing your own food, and in the case of seed saving, saving money doing it, make sure and like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.